Okay, we are live streamed, and I see Tom has joined us, Travis. So I don't see John Colucci or Dan at this point, but perhaps we can begin.
Sure, we'll get rolling. I'm calling to order tonight's meeting of the Downtown Advisory Committee. I think we can probably skip individual introductions and move into item number 3, which is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion for the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
We have motions or a second?
Second.
Second, thank you, Kim.
Is that Sarah?
Yes.
Sarah,
Okay, thank you.
Sarah.
Yep.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Is there any discussion, any comments on the minutes from our last meeting? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Great, it's unanimous and perfect timing. Dan, Rocky and Dan are with us. Let's move right into the report from the developers.
Okay. So if I can share my screen, I could bring up a couple of bullet points that we have to kind of start the conversation.
Sure, you should have rights, Dan.
Okay. Everybody see that?
I think you're ahead of the agenda, Dan.
I am. Okay.
I think so. I think we appear in two places here.
Oh,
Developers report and then also input on deliverables. I'm not really sure what the committee's looking for on the report. I can jump in and just kind of tell you where we're at with some things that are going on within the project currently. We're before the planning board this coming week with a small sub-phase of residential that Dan and I have been working on for a little while. And so that's before the planning board. We hope to get approval on that. That'll create a few more house lots and some lots that will then further subdivide for multifamily uses. So that's on the agenda this coming Monday night. We've also got part of the project in front of the main DEP right now, and Dan could elaborate more on that. But we've been breaking the project up into sections to get overall stormwater management approvals put in place, and so we're moving forward with that at this point in time. So that's kind of what's going on right now. I'm also pleased to report I heard from Maine Health today that they're putting between 600 and 800 people a day through their vaccination clinic, which is a lot less than what they hope to be able to do. They're set up to do a couple thousand a day, but they're just kind of getting their feet under themselves, and obviously they need more vaccine, but things are going pretty well. So pretty happy to report on that. Dan, was there anything else we wanted to toss out there tonight, or?
I guess the only other thing, Rocky, and good overview is there's a few more innovation district applicants moving forward to the planning board. So the northern end of the project, there's 2 more sites that are going to the planning board for review. One is Crown Lift Trucks, a forklift company we're really excited to be hosting in the Downs, and then another 30,000 square foot kind of combination office, kind of flex space building. So those 2 also are kind of proceeding to round out the first few phases of the light industrial area of the project. So I think
so we had about a 1 month lull with the planning board where we weren't completely dominating the agenda, and I think we're back with quite a few items on the agenda, and it's going to be a busy spring for the Downs, that's for sure.
One thing worth noting, I guess it's probably appropriate under developers report. There's a couple of things in motion, one further than another, but it really affects the pace of development in the Downs. The first is what we call administrative review. Rocky alluded to their domination of planning board agendas. That's been true for the last, well, really since they started, and will likely continue. So we have initiated a process. It's just beginning with the council, but it essentially allows projects in the innovation district, in the industrial zone, and the light industrial zones to be subjected to a staff level administrative review rather than the planning board. So no standards are relaxed. It's simply a different review authority. And we think it's going to help move things through the process quicker. It's the same level of effort on the part of staff. It certainly helps the developers get through the planning board process and frankly alleviate some pressure on the planning board itself. So we're hopeful that that's going to continue through the council and be in a position to deal with what Rocky predicts in the future here. The other one, which is far more conceptual at this point, but we have run out of growth permits for this year. We do have a growth management ordinance that specifically is designed to pace residential growth. And recently, led by Councillor Clucci in particular on this call, there's been some kind of policy concepts that have been floated. And so, I'm just encouraged that there appears to be some initial policy interest, and hopefully there's some momentum building to find a longer term solution. So the Downs and other projects can continue building on a pace that meets their needs, but also doesn't unduly impact town and school services. So stay tuned. Those things will be going on through the spring and into the summer, I predict.
Great. Any questions on the developers report? I know we're going to hear more from these guys later. Okay, subcommittee reports. This one might be interesting today. Hopefully all 4 subcommittees had the opportunity to meet either meet remotely or over email or have a means of conversation and talked about your schedule and your plans. And I think probably what the reports tonight are largely going to be those organizing reports, but I think we'll kind of leave it up to each subcommittee to talk about what you discussed and what you want to report back to us. So I'll volunteer to go first. The communications subcommittee was Sarah and Art and John Anderson and I. And we mostly talked about sort of a process for a flow of information from the public, both how we want to ensure that the public know how to engage us and what we do with the information when it comes in. So we've talked about seeing if we can secure some space in the leader for a column describing what kind of public feedback we're looking for and what our committee's charge is, what will be valuable to hear from the public over the course of the next couple of months. And the other half of the conversation was sort of what do we do when we hear from people? And we sort of agreed that, I guess kind of following policy of most other committees, that we're sharing the group email address, which would go to all of us. If people individually receive messages from the public via, by text or email, or someone just runs into you and says, hey, I had this idea, the appropriate path would be to send it to me, and then I will forward it to the entire committee. If it seems like something that may require follow-up or further investigation or a subcommittee to look into, in part I'll use my discretion if it's obvious, and if not, I'll pull together the communications committee and ask for their advice on whether something should be either elevated or passed along to another subcommittee or just shared with the whole group as information from the public. So that's the process that we talked about. By all means, if anybody has questions or more advice, we'd love to hear it. But we're mostly just kind of forming our means to be a conduit to the public, and that's what we landed on.
Travis, was there any idea when you guys were going to have your first public input meeting?
We didn't talk about hosting a public input meeting, in large part because the past several years there have been many of those. Planapalooza in particular covered a lot of downtown discussion, and so it didn't feel like it makes sense to us now at the beginning of this to hold one of those. Also something that we're certainly willing to hear more, whether it's encouragement from the public or committee members that we ought to be doing that. We did discuss it, and our feeling was that for now we don't think it's necessary because there's been so much public input so far, and it was sort of the genesis of this committee. And so for the interim, the committee will move forward, encouraging the public to contact us with their ideas.
Okay.
So who would like to jump in from another subcommittee? Did you all assign spokespeople, or are we, am I going to start calling names at random? Hey, Art, you're on a second committee. How about you talk about your other group?
Yeah, what committee was that? I forgot. Let's see, Brian really kind of took the lead on a lot of it, but we were talking about the grandstand, and Kim Rand was on the committee as well. And please, you two, fill in with anything. We're going to be meeting on Thursday nights on the off week of this meeting. So we're just started to do some brainstorming, and we're going to be working on that this week and emailing one another with some thoughts on what potentially could be a good fit. We're just going to throw some wet noodles at the wall, I think, right now, and see if anything sticks. And if the grandstand is not there, the same thing. Brian, I'm missing something. I can't remember now.
Yeah, that's a good start. I just pulled up my notes, Art, just to go through. We decided to tackle essentially 4 questions. Whether to keep or eliminate the grandstand, potential uses for the space, if we eliminate it, how to program the space. And then, a little more globally, how other obsolete buildings like mills have been reused successfully, just to help guide us in our thinking about this. We talked about our meeting dates. One thing that was kind of interesting was a brief discussion we had about the landmark nature of the site and how it's the piece that ties back to the history and the original notion of why this is Scarborough Downs. And that's maybe a little bit of an intuitive conversation, and it makes sense and it's obvious. And we had a neat pivot in the conversation where we were reminded that not every memory of that building is a good one. A lot of people lost a lot of money in that building. And so I think it was a good reminder to me, and I think others, that as we remember that building, that it's not necessarily all smiles and unicorns and rainbows. There could be a lot of despair in that building. So it's kind of a good reset and a good initial framing.
Although I must say, if you walk in there now and see the renovation and the work that's happening as we speak, all of that despair is washed away in a hurry.
Yeah. And Tom, maybe just to layer on top of that, the final point that did come up was this notion of like iterative use of space that we talked about, and maybe not necessarily getting it perfect the first time, but allowing for a use of space that evolves over time and eventually finds its way to the right thing. Was one thing that we acknowledged as a group to guide us and frankly maybe take a little bit of pressure off from getting it just right.
I mean, Brian, in the committee, it occurs to me that kind of hulking structure, certainly the potential uses for the space is an essential exercise, but also kind of just the care and upkeep and the life cycle costs, I think, need to be part of the equation. I don't think that needs to be the first consideration, because that might throw a wet blanket on the discussion, but I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges, it strikes me, is just how do we maintain that over time? Yeah.
Tom, we had, I don't know if it was quite a compact, but a little bit of an understanding to not let practicalities get introduced too early, but also to keep each other in check. If we start getting too fantastical and too wild, and also to hold open the possibility of something new that refers to the past, that, that isn't necessarily those.
No, fair enough. Dream big. I retract those words.
Brian, any other members of that committee? Any questions for Brian or Ed? How about the modeling committee, the committee that talked about how to educate us on what we ought to be focusing on?
Is Tom here? I missed that meeting, unfortunately, and I think Tom was taking the lead on that, it appeared.
Yeah, I took a little bit of the lead on that. Mostly I summarized a lot of what we talked about, so I'd be happy to go through those. I mean, I wouldn't call them exactly minutes, but the notes from that meeting with everybody here. We'll be meeting on the opposing Tuesdays from this meeting, so we'll be meeting in a week's time, and going forward until we believe the work there is done. We basically got together. That subcommittee is Brian, Bruce, I believe Dan sat in on that as well. And I think Kim's in on that too. Yeah, and Kim was there. And essentially we wanted to pose the idea, obviously, of looking back at some models that have done, positive things with a similar sort of task that we have before us. And then maybe even a few that have some, have found some errors and can sort of guide our decision making going forward. So throughout that process, we brought up a number of different areas that we could look at as possible models. Mashpee Commons of Mashpee, Massachusetts has come up a number of times. Church Street in Burlington, Pearl Street in Boulder, and Assembly Row in Somerville were four that we brought up. And then we basically tried to deconstruct from the start, just brainstorming ideas where their successes lied and where we should start this sort of, I guess, large conversation and start honing it in on a beginning point. We bounced some ideas around, was it potentially the business mixes that potentially were the successful catalysts for these areas? Was that something that we were even going to be able to have a lot of input on? Or was that something that would be more up to the, just the market in general and the developers? Posed a lot of questions in that regard. We looked at potential traffic patterns and just how a lot of people are going to be utilizing the downtown area. We looked at the layout and sort of where the grand entrance essentially was going to be of the new downtown. We also discussed a little bit of the future expandability of this area. Was this sort of something that, once we've determined kind of the footprint here in this committee, is this something that's sort of set in stone, or is there going to be any opportunity for this area to grow over time? We bounced that question off Dan a couple of times. We went more in depth into the business mix so that we could potentially sort of assess the area. I thought this was a pretty cool concept. How do we sort of attract people throughout all periods of the day so that the usage of this area isn't just sort of spiking at one point. So it doesn't essentially become like, the old port where everything is, really busy 9 p.m. and on. We want to make sure that there's sort of traffic from, all parts of the day so that there's sort of uses there that can be inclusive for everyone within the community. We discussed how impacts of businesses such as hotels, bars and restaurants, maybe liquor licenses, groceries, markets, cafe, retail, any of those things could sort of play a role in that sort of concept. And then a big question we've been posing is whether or not that Main Street becomes a pedestrian only way, which is something that we're looking a little bit more deeply into and using those models to, I guess, guide those decisions. A big question that came up as well was, we're doing a lot so far. I think even this, the main committee here, as well as the subcommittees, talked a little bit about the, the structural components and, the ways in and those sorts of things, but we haven't really talked much about a cultural component, which I think comes back towards Brian's comments from the prior committee about the carrying over features of the Downs, whether that is the grandstand or other features, to sort of tie forward. What is it that sort of makes this feel a little bit less like a, brand new, I guess, never before used sort of area, and how do we give it a little bit of a cultural aspect that ties it into the history of the town, so it doesn't feel alienated from the rest of the surrounding area. So we've sort of bounced a lot of those ideas around, and we'll be honing that a little bit as we go forward. Bruce also offered a great model, or I guess it was like kind of a guidebook. Bruce, I'll let you speak to it a little bit more. I think you're probably more intimately familiar with that than I am, but I think it was about 10 rules for sort of developing a downtown sort of thing. And we've had a chance to review that and allow that information to start guiding some decisions going forward as well. So Bruce, if you have any comments on that, I believe it's been shared in the
Yeah, I think that I sent out an email to the entire committee, and really what it is, it's a publication, Travis. I think you might be familiar with it as well. It was developed by the Urban League Institute. It was a group out of DC. These people really know what they're doing when it comes to putting together successful town centers. And it was about, a few years ago when they had one of their meetings in DC, they put together, not to make it sound like it was done in an afternoon, but a rather comprehensive, it's about 40-page long document about 10 different principles, they call them, for the development of a successful town center. I thought, quite frankly, it would help the committee, because there's not that many people familiar with urban planning and what it takes to develop a town center, me included. I mean, I'm not familiar with it. It told me a whole lot. The thing that I like about this book, and I want to talk a little bit more with Tom about it later, Tom Hall, is that I think that all of these discussions that we're having here and all these different committees are ideas that are presented within this book. But the nice thing about these 10 specific principles is that it gives, I think, our whole purpose structure. And with this structure, I think that we can start to break down different aspects of this into bite-sized pieces for everybody in the committee, so that we can attack this and then come up with a document yet to be, I guess, discussed and finalized for formatting at the end of the process. So if nothing else, with all that said, it's probably worth a time to take a look at it, at least to get familiar with it, because there's a lot of good ideas, I think, presented in it. So I think it's time well spent. It's hard to do just in one sitting. You might want to take it in a couple little bites. I showed it to Dan also, and Dan took a look at it. He thought it was rather comprehensive. So I don't think that I'm throwing something out there that's going to be a waste of time.
Hey, Dan, could I ask a question? Is it West Hartford, Blue Rock, in terms of another example?
Yeah, it's Blue Back Square.
Blue Back Square.
And it's West Hartford is
Connecticut.
Yeah, Connecticut, right out of Hartford. It's kind of an urban suburb of Hartford, and it's cool. It has sort of similarities to Assembly Row, but different context. Brian mentioned that as a model too. But yeah, it's a great example, Tom.
More of a suburban context. So Tom, to your committee, maybe that's another one you could just put on your list in terms of what appears to be quite a successful venture in a similar venture.
Yeah.
Dan, when you're looking at these other facilities or these other models, I would imagine that a lot of this gets back to understanding the demographics of Scarborough and the surrounding area. Have you guys developed those sort of models as to who your target audience is, and give us a way of sort of helping decide on whether some ideas are too grand or other ideas aren't grand enough to try to help us select and wade through and evaluate some of this information that I think that we're throwing out there? I think the way to separate the spaghetti is to understand who the audience is in a way.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you, have you guys, I guess, and I haven't been here long enough, so I have no sense for it, of what the demographics are in terms of the amount of people and the level of income around here and what you expected to draw out of this facility.
We've done a lot of market research for the project in general, around housing types and what to build for, and to be kind of diverse and not hang our hat on, any one particular demographic, frankly. And Rocky can speak to that too. I think going back to your models example, we're in a very interesting time. And we talked about that too, Tom, Kim and I, and Brian, around a lot of these models that I know of and people think of are premised on retail, like outlet retail, like Mashpee Commons, where retail is the dominant draw. And also being in college towns, we talked about that. And those are two things we can't rely on right now. Scarborough currently isn't a college town. We talked about how do we recruit a college to the Downs? That could help. But in retail is in a very interesting time. So as we think about how to activate the downtown, we need to be recognizing kind of those elements and thinking about what are the catalysts.
One of the models that I was hoping to present the other night, and unfortunately I couldn't, it had a couple really nice aspects to it. Actually, restaurants were the largest draw for this, and that was augmented with other mixed use like retail and other sort of novelty type of places. But also another thing that they did, what I thought was phenomenally, I just thought it was a genius idea, is that they did what they called land banking. And within the downtown center, where they didn't build the whole center and fully realize its density, they put some areas in there as the currently open areas and made them parking. And it's an area that it's a center that I'm very familiar with because I lived not too far from it. But I thought it was a genius idea that they land bank this stuff for future development to see what ticked. More restaurants work, they were going to put more restaurants. If retail, great. Residential, boom. So I thought that was a really good concept in terms of future flexibility for any sort of program. Something I thought was worth considering. Mm-hmm. Anyhow.
Just one final point, just to the subcommittee. I think Bruce asked a really important fundamental question, which is, who is the audience? Are we looking to address the needs of the Scarborough community, or is it more of a regional draw? All those decisions have impact in terms of how you build it out, how you deal with parking and traffic flow and such. And I think that's part of the mystery of this process. I don't think anyone has the answer to that question.
Any other points?
It's something that we need to sort of zero in on. I don't think that there's like a Joe average that we've got there, but I think that if we understand a little bit about what these demographics are in terms of population, in terms of income levels, and then start from that center mass and then work out to both the higher end and lower end of stuff, not to make it sound, that we can address all of those, but sort of focus our attention on those things that at the end of the day make this project successful. If we have all these great ideas but nobody comes, everybody's going to be unhappy with an unsuccessful project. So I really do think that we're trying to figure out what this target is so that Dan and Rocky can make a ton of money and the town collect a boatload of taxes and we all have someplace great to go.
So let's, that was great. I think that the modeling committee has come up with a great list of questions that I think we all want to answer together. And you're going to start zeroing in on the best way to find and provide examples for us to work with. I want to get to the downtown district committee, and then we still have a schedule ahead of us. So we have the final committee is the downtown committee, Tom, Kim, and Basha.
So we had actually one email exchange and Tom replied it, but after that we did not. I think we missed. I think we sent it to Kim Rand. but we don't know whether it's a Kim Bridgham or Kim Grant, who is a part of our committee, and that's where we stopped. So whoever came part of that, probably we will reconnect with her, and then we will schedule another meeting on what day we want to meet and discuss. So we did not made any progress on this at this point of time.
Kim or Tom, any?
Yeah, so I guess just touching on the committee, I kind of ran out of bandwidth at the end of the week and wasn't able, unfortunately, to schedule the time I was hoping to for this committee without even honestly checking with the other two. But I did have sort of a small agenda sort of put together. In the prior subcommittee meeting, we did talk kind of extensively about the connectivity within the Downs, which I think was a good framework to start on while sort of building out to the greater downtown district that's going to be sort of encompassed by what currently exists up Route 1. So touching on that, I think another big piece of information that we're going to sort of, I'm hoping to bring to the table here is I've started compiling some traffic counts for Route 1, what sort of the potential amount of access is. And then this was sort of something that was brought up in the modeling subcommittee a few times that I think this group and probably some of the subcommittees are sort of underestimating a little bit is the proximity that this project has to the highway and what sort of impact. And we're sort of going over this question of not only are we connecting to sort of downtown Scarborough, but we're also connecting, to a broader audience in general by the proximity to the highway. So sort of floating that idea of obviously we want to, connect to the schools and the current infrastructure, the public, the current sort of public use buildings that exist, but then also sort of what does the impact of sort of connecting the downtown district to sort of a greater audience through the highway access point there, sort of what kind of impact does that have? And then I think the next sort of item on that agenda is going to be if there is sort of an interest in some sort of public transport to bring people from sort of that Oak Hill region to sort of connect through that residential section into this, center that's going to be focused on more retail and public access. So those are the three big points that I think we'll be bringing up in that first meeting. We haven't had a chance to sort of put the heads together and propose it yet, but that's, I think, where we'll sort of center as we get going.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments on the subcommittee reports? All right, let's move on. So item 6 is discussion points that came up in our last meeting. The first one is developers' input on deliverables. So I think this is where we hand it back over to you, Rocky and Dan.
Okay,
You're on, Dan.
sure. So I'll share my screen again. We just put some notes together. Sorry, I need to find my. Everybody see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, sorry.
There we go.
There you go.
And I'm not sure if this hits the mark or not. So we're kind of trying to surmise the goals here, but I think one of the things that came up is kind of the scope of how the committee's tasks kind of plug into the development project. And so these are some things that Rocky and I kind of brainstormed, and they relate to our presentation from a few weeks ago. Maybe it was 2 meetings ago, around kind of what we'd benefit from out of this committee process, maybe in addition to additional items. And so in no particular order, this is kind of our list to be added to or subtracted from based on committee kind of input. I guess one, first and foremost, sort of guidance on, what are those desirable kind of public spaces within the downtown, kind of gathering places and amenities. There's certainly opportunity for that, and that's often key in sort of a town center, downtown area. Along the same lines, kind of guidance on the Main Street design elements. And we talked about that a bit about that in the modeling committee and would want to continue to talk about that in terms of what does the Main Street look like? What is it made up of? Size of sidewalks? Is there traffic? Is there traffic some of the time? A lot of those kind of, is there a plaza, etc. And how would that benefit the committee? What does the committee, the community want to see? Another one, and we've talked about this before, is guidance and recommendations on civic buildings, kind of being often a key component. And that would be the asset to the downtown, also obviously be an asset to the community. Brainstorming, collaboration on the grandstand reuse. Our committee is already looking at that. That's obvious. Another one is related more to kind of ordinances, town policies, and just making sure that when we're doing our process together, that we're identifying maybe things that need to change in the future to enable some of the things that we want to do. The town has good ordinances, good policies, but they're not necessarily designed around downtown. The town doesn't have a downtown. So thinking about, parking, I've mentioned before, parking ordinance or regulations might need to be changed to enable what you expect in a downtown area with shared parking or maybe a parking garage or what have you. So that's just an example. Maybe related to what Bruce has brought up and the modeling committee or other committees are, what are kind of key municipal actions or measures that were taken in these other communities to make the downtown successful? We obviously have a lot of work on our end to enable the downtown. But kind of what are the lessons learned on the municipal side to enable a downtown or a kind of created downtown to be successful? And then the last thing, just is sort of like, you can have some ideas and guidance, but giving some thought to kind of implementation. That's sort of certainly at the end of the committee process, but having some measures to say, okay, we want this, what are the steps to take to do that? And, I guess that's a question for the group as to how much this committee does that, or is that, is that a step after this committee? And Rocky, please kind of add to what I've highlighted.
No, I think you've covered it, Dan.
Travis, if I could just ask Dan and Rocky, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but are you willing and able to provide kind of the technical assistance and professional assistance to produce tangible materials for, the final deliverables to help the council and the public understand, conceptual layout and those sorts of things to the extent that we need some visual aids, if you will, to help relay the recommendation? Is that something have thought about, or is that something we should be thinking about retaining consultants to help us with?
We've had some conversation amongst ourselves about that. We're not really sure what the right route to go is there. And I think there's, we probably have got to have some more conversation amongst ourselves before we can get back to you and tell you where we think we're at.
I want to call that out early. The committee has the ability, the council contemplated the need potentially for the committee having its own kind of technical support with consultants. And to the extent that we need to be thinking of that, we should start that process sooner than later is my only point of bringing it up.
I get it.
Let's plan to follow up on that maybe at our next meeting as a separate agenda item, custom modeling, and it also may come up during Bruce's presentation next. Are there any questions for Rocky and Dan about this deliverables list? I'll just say this is, I wish we could meet in person because this is the kind of thing I would want to have taped up on the wall. This is really helpful, guys. For my part, I'm going to try to reread this before every time we meet. It's just a great sort of framing of what we ought to be trying to put together for you. If there are no questions or comments, Dan, if you wouldn't mind turning your screen off.
Dan, can you share that with me and I'll put that up as a resource for us to draw from?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll email to you this evening, Tom.
Great, thank you.
I've got a comment.
Travis?
Brian?
I just, in looking at that list, I am struck that it does help to condense the conversation that we have, I think, and seems, at least for me, to pull away a little bit from the type of advice that you might get from a market study about, programming space and, the types of conversations about, do you put in a coffee shop or a bar or a barber shop? That list of what's going to be useful to them really seem to pull away from the types of things that I just listed and towards some very tangible things that I think can help keep us focused and delivering some very good, useful deliverables.
Brian, we
I
still
really
want a
appreciate
bar and a coffee shop, just to be clear.
You don't need us to tell you that, Dan.
All right.
Come on. Bruce had his hand up. I want to make sure.
I just got a question. Looking at that list there, I'm just noticing that, I think all those points are good, but I was struck by the word of guidance on all of this. And then also leading up to the idea that the committee itself might be putting together a master plan. Quite, looking over what we were charged to do with as a committee, and this is part of what I'm going to talk with Tom Hall about, is that it looks like the committee wants us to take a look at what the developers are proposing, to review it, evaluate it, and they encourage recommendations. Looking at this list, it looks like the developers are asking us to develop a plan. And, we're not really capable of doing that. We really don't, collectively together, we don't have the knowledge, background, or experience to do that. I think what we can do is make recommendations and react to what the developer is proposing and augment it with things that we think maybe should be looked at. And then the developer, I would imagine, would eventually say, well, that's a great idea, but we don't think it's going to work in this situation, or yeah, we'll give this thing more study. I just think, and it's one of my concerns about the direction the committee is going on, and that we are trying to develop a master plan. And I think that we should be evaluating and recommending what's going on with the master plan. And so the the discussion about the having a deliverable of a drawing, I think that, quite frankly, I'd be looking at the developers and saying, what do you guys got? And we make the recommendations. I just think it's way too much for this committee. I think we're way out of our league, quite frankly, to assume the position that we're going to design this on our own. I don't think it's our charge, nor do I think that we've got this committee is the right group to do that. I think we need somebody, and we need a group of urban planners, quite frankly, to tackle something like that. So I think we can make recommendations, but I don't think that we should be taking over a wholesale development of this process. So, but anyhow, I want to talk more with Tom about it and see what he
pleased to talk to you. I would simply say for the full group in response to that is, this is intended to be a collaborative process with the developers. I think they do have some ideas. I think our timing is great in that, to the extent that this process can help influence their thinking. But at the end of the day, they need to make application to the planning board and get a master plan approved. And so I think it's going to be a bit of both, Bruce, and I'm pleased to talk with you offline a bit more about that.
Well, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this, but it seems like we as a committee are starting with a blank piece of paper here a little bit.
And to jump in, Bruce, just to clarify a bit, that wasn't my intention in the presentation. Guidance meeting, the committee's doing the design. We already, as we talked about, and I think we presented a few weeks ago, we have a layout right now. We have a general location of a main street. We have a lot of the components, at least in the conceptual design level. So I guess when I say guidance on public spaces is, there's a development there's a product a developer does outside of the town process, and then there's a product that's created that if we get input, we're going to do a, I don't know, 10-foot wide sidewalk. We have discussions with the committee, and maybe that should be a plaza, and maybe it should be a 16-foot wide sidewalk, just to kind of dumb it down. And that there's a collaborative process, and that's what we intend by guidance. Not here, guys, design our downtown for us. It's more how does the downtown committee help supplement our intentions to make it better for the community and have components that we wouldn't otherwise have, I guess is one way to think about it.
Yeah, and using your sidewalk as an example there, I think it has to do with what direction the uses, the mixed uses are that we're going in there. If it's retail oriented, for instance, like you were mentioned earlier, the sidewalks don't need to be as wide. If it's going to be more restaurant oriented, then the sidewalk should be wider to allow for, outdoor dining, al fresco, and that kind of jazz to occur out there, eating outside for ice cream stores, that sort of thing. So one depends on the other. And, if one committee is tasked with transportation, which will include vehicles plus pedestrians, I think that there's another committee that's going to say, well, we're interested in perhaps the mixed uses, and this is what we think is going to work. Actually, and we're going to, that's really what you guys should say is, well, we think that in this particular situation, we're going to try to attract these type of tenants. And the result is going to be then how do we address transportation, both vehicle and pedestrian to address that. So just to say, well, we really like wide sidewalks with no context of, well, what's going to be there? We're going to have a big retail store. We're going to have, which doesn't need that. Or we're going to have.
Yeah, so I think, Bruce, I think it's a really important point that we keep reminding ourselves of where we fit in the sort of dance between us and the developers on this. Our goal is to provide our interests, our wish list. I'm not sure how else to describe it, but to work collaboratively and decide what we think we would value, and then the developers will come back with models based on what we offer. And I know we have a short window to do that, and we're at the stage now, which I think is valuable, which is that we've started to group off into committees and talk about creating those lists. But I do think our goal is a list of things on paper, and as we start to collate that list, then Dan and Rocky and their team will start to come back with more concrete things that we can decide what we like and what we don't. I'm glad you brought it up, and I think it's important that we keep in mind where our responsibility ends, and that for Dan and Rocky's part, they understand where it's time to step in and say, no, here's a concrete example of what you're talking about. Do you like it? How would you change it? And so on. And I hate to keep saying we're early in this because I know it's now the middle of February, but I do believe so long as we keep that focus on we're providing feedback, concrete examples are coming, then we ought to, we shouldn't feel that burden of trying to develop it ourselves. You're right, I can't do that either.
Well, this got into the conversation, or this conversation came up with me because of trying to put this schedule together. Yeah, as I keep on referring to it, and you mentioned, I developing, brainstorming ideas, AKA throwing spaghetti at the wall. We can approach the developers with all the things that we in the public think will be, neato ideas, but they're going to have to look at it and say, well, yeah, we'd like to do that, but we think it's inappropriate in this case. So we like this idea, we don't like that idea, and we think that, and they can sort through it and come back. But it's going to be, we make a recommendation, they do an evaluation, and they come back to us. And then at a certain point after that, that's going to be the presentation I imagine we're going to develop for the town council. So there's this, throwing spaghetti, evaluate the spaghetti, and then do the, agree what we're going to do, and then do the drawing. So that fits into the schedule process. I haven't heard where, I'm only hearing where we're throwing ideas out, and there's no, I haven't I haven't heard, and maybe I'm missing something here, where the developers are going to come back and say, yeah, this is good, that's not so good, we looked at this, but we don't think that that's going to work, and pick out what they want, because we're not going to, unless we're not driving this thing, we're just developing some thoughts.
Brian.
Trev, yeah, I'm looking around this little Zoom room of ours, and it strikes me that we've got a really nice representation of roles. We've also got nice representation of backgrounds, but we've got a group of us who are representing the public and maybe the wish list people or whatever we want to call ourselves. But we've also got folks from the developer who are consistently arriving and showing up and engaged. And we've also got people, representing elected officials on the call or the meeting. And, I wonder if folks would be comfortable, just as kind of a base premise, if we all kind of take the hats that we're wearing and agree to advocate from that position and rely on each other to keep the other positions in check. And what I mean by that is, if the folks from the town, representing the elected officials, feel like we're not meeting the original charge of this committee, we would leave it to you to speak up. And if the people from the development team feel like you're not getting the, what you want or need out of the committee, we would leave it to you to speak up. And I just wonder if that would let, us, as the citizen inputters, have a little bit less to worry about and really be able to focus on, what it is that we want from a purely input perspective. It might provide some relief. And I'm just curious how that might sit with people.
John?
Yeah, Brian, I just commented, but I agree. I mean, listening to the committee report outs today, I think you guys are heading in the right direction. And it's going to become more clear, I think, as you move forward, what exactly that end output is going to look like. But yeah, don't stress too much about the details. I think you're going on the right path, and it's a collaboration, right? So this is Scarborough's downtown. The developer has an interest. We have an interest, and we're trying to work together to find some place that can be special for our community when we're all done.
And I guess I'll just say, we're about halfway through our schedule. I think that this segues nicely into Bruce, your next presentation, which is, it's probably a good idea for us to start saying, when do we want to give ourselves a deadline to provide some things to the developers? And when do we want to ask for a deadline for the developers to report something back to us in order for us to make comment on? So that's my segue. Sorry, Tom.
Would it be more productive, Bruce, to kind of put a pin in that until you and I get a chance to collaborate?
You're muted, Bruce.
There we go. Yeah, I apologize. I was gonna bow out, excuse me, on that until I talked with Tom, because after I got into this a little bit in trying to assign milestones, I got way more questions, and I don't really want to go off in another direction and until Tom gets my head straight on this. So one way or the other.
Yeah, Travis. So if we could have this as an agenda item, we'll be able to perhaps advance that thinking then.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, rather than leave it all on Bruce's shoulders for the next 2 weeks, I think you can guide us in a conversation on benchmarking the next couple of months. So we know by such and such a date, we're going to try and provide something useful to the developers so they can provide something back by such and such a date. I think it's a very valuable conversation.
Travis, could you indulge me just for 30 seconds?
Mm-hmm.
Just from my perspective, the basic premise from which this conversation came was a realization of the town and the Downs in negotiating the credit enhancement agreement that we really didn't know what we were talking about, and that we needed a process to really start to get our arms around this. And the premise of that is that they're left to their own devices. And I believe we've got very community-minded, altruistic developers. We couldn't ask for a better partner in that regard. but left to their own devices, there may be things that we value and think would be important that they wouldn't do on their own because of financial constraints or what have you. And so we wanted the opportunity to influence their thinking. And that's where it comes down to Brian's epiphany. We need to be thinking at 10,000 feet here, not down to, who's going to occupy that storefront. It's really, what are those really essential building blocks? And the premise is, if we're so hell-bent on them, the town may need to financially participate to make them happen. I mean, that's part of the reality here. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. But I just, from my perspective, that's where this started, and that's where I think needs to be focused on.
Yeah, framed perfectly, Tom. And having a sense of what the next couple of months looks like, even from a 30,000 foot view, I think will be useful. So Sarah is going to provide an update on school facility and school needs.
Cool. All right. I'm just going to share my screen. I don't have much as a presentation, but I just wanted to share some bullet points to help orient us. You guys all see that okay?
Yep.
I'm just gonna move some things around here. Okay. So a little background. I was thinking of doing like a much larger in-depth presentation on where we are with the school facilities. After speaking to Councillor Anderson, I realized that really the most important component is just what our needs are kind of fit into obviously the downtown, and how does that impact the downtown? So what programs, what connections do we need to programming, what connections do we need to have to the rest of town, things like that. So what I thought I would do was just give you guys just a summary of kind of where we are right now, and then what our next steps are moving forward. I do not have planned a detailed facilities overview of all of our facilities, but all that information has been uploaded to the share drive, and I can also give you more information if you have questions. All right. So in 2017, and I think it might have been commissioned actually even prior to 2017, the board at the time, after looking at some enrollment studies and the population projections, decided to embark on a project to figure out, to look at our existing facilities, because if the projections came true, our primary schools, the three that we have, as well as the middle school, would be at well over capacity. And so at that time, the Wentworth project had, I think, just recently completed. So the Wentworth age students wasn't that much of a concern, but the middle school is basically, there's a significant amount of portables. I have the exact numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head. And so that's already overflowing. And then we're seeing the same happen at the primary schools as well. So that commission was done, or that study was done by Harriman. And they basically came back and they gave 8 options. And of those options, there was, consolidate, it was, renovate a couple of buildings, but leave others, or it was instead of building a consolidated school, you keep the 3 schools, you renovate them, and then you create a 4th school. So there's lots of different options. And ultimately what they came back with was their recommendation was consolidation was the best option, both for programming, but also for financial reasons. And when I say programming, our primary schools right now are aging. And they're not up to DOE standards in a lot of ways, meaning like the class sizes themselves are small. And then we're also, we're planning for now, but we're also planning for the future. And the enrollment projections, if they continue to stay true, obviously this year has really kind of been an anomaly. And so we have to figure out how we sort of update our enrollment studies to reflect what's happened this year with a lot of kids being homeschooled, and will probably continue to be homeschooled, some of them anyway. But we in Scarborough, we pride ourselves in having small class sizes. And so that's a big component of the decision as well. So we could maintain, we could keep the facilities as they are now, but then our class sizes would increase. And that just isn't a good learning environment, but it's also not a good experience for teachers as well. So in 2007, so this was before anyone who was on the board today was on the board. They voted to approve the consolidated school, and then that project stalled for other reasons. So when I got on the board, that was one of our priority projects, and back in like 2019, we started the building steering committee, and we asked them to do the things that you see on the screens right now. So what are we going to figure out what we're going to build? Well, first of all, update the study. So look at the study, get some updated data, see if the problem still exists, if it's exacerbated. And ultimately what they found is the enrollment projections largely came true. So we're continuing to rely on that enrollment study to plan for the future. But they came back to us, and their recommendation, again, was a consolidated school. So in early 2020, the board voted to approve that. And that's kind of where we are. So of the 4 things that you see on that list, we're still at the first one, where we said build a consolidated school. So the next step is we would need to hire a firm, and we have applications from firms already. We did an RFQ process. We got, I think, around 8 or so responses from different architects and design firms. And the goal of that project would really be for them to answer some of the other questions. So where is it going to be? What's it going to look like? How many grades are actually going to be in the school? Because there's conversations of, do we have pre-K to 3rd grade? Wentworth then becomes 4, 5, 6, and then the middle school becomes 7, 8. That's an option. None of that has been decided. There needs to be traffic studies that needs to be decided there, or that needs to be done. There needs to be sort of wetland and conservation studies done. All of that will be done by this group. And so it's our hope that we'll get approval during this budget cycle to be able to expedite that process. And part of what this group will do is to look at our existing options in town and decide where it could go. And so the big question that, as it relates to this, is, and the space in the Downs, is how big is it going to be? And the short answer is we don't know. There's some projections out there that we've been given, just basically using comps of other schools in the region that would be similar, that are around 170,000 square feet. But to orient us, this is what we have today. So we're really talking about, if you guys need to sort of visualize it, we're talking about the same size of Wentworth. If we were to renovate the existing primary schools, they would pretty much double in size in order to do what we need to do and to accommodate the space and also the additional programming. And for those of you who are familiar with the locations of those primary schools, they really don't have the space on the lots. So that's kind of a no-go from the beginning almost, if we really want to do it right. So I'll pause there, and I don't know, maybe Dan or Rocky, you guys can comment on like what you have for square footage actually in downtown, or take questions. Travis.
I've got a question. Is this, when you talk about consolidation, is this envisioned to be in one structure or like a campus of separate buildings?
So the consolidation would just be, I should have made this clear, it was just be for the primary schools. And the design is not decided yet. It would most likely be one school, but there's different models, right? So in Scarborough, one of the things that we took into consideration, or the design would have to take into consideration, is that we like the small school feel. and I've heard people say mega school, it wouldn't be a mega school, but we would try and create sort of schools within schools, right? So you'd have like wings with like a hub and spoke model, or you would have sort of two schools with a gym and a cafeteria connecting them. So it would be one school, one building.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is because it will have an impact on how much property is going to be required to support the facility.
Yeah.
Kim Bridgham has her hand up.
Sarah, is there a timeline for, basically finishing some of that work? When would the ideal location be identified? What would the school look like? What's the timeline?
Yeah, ASAP. I mean, we've been told by different people that, from the day we start, it's 4 years out from building. So, and it's going to take us probably a year just to get it on the referendum, because this will have to go to vote. So our goal right now is, if we get the budget approved in this fiscal year, so in June, we may be able to get something on the referendum next year. And so then let's say it's about 3 years from there from actually being built. Like being occupied, I should say.
But as far as it having answers to some of your questions, like where's the ideal location? What's the ideal layout? Is that?
It all depends on if we can get budget approved in this cycle in order to be able to contract out that work. So if we can do that, we can do that right away. And that is, I think, I have it in one of the presentations, but I think that's about a 6 to 9 month contract period once we get them on board. So again, kind of working towards the November 2022 referendum.
Just appreciate a building of 170,000 square feet is, 3.5 to 4 acres under roof. You can probably double that with parking, circulation, bus lanes. So you're looking at probably an 8 to 10 acre, plot of land to accommodate a school that size.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's my guess, but I don't think it's too far off.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Does anybody else have questions for Sarah? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian. No, change your mind. Okay. So let's move on to committee discussion. Questions, subjects. What do people want to talk about? I'll throw out there an email that I had forwarded a few days ago. Very interesting, timely subject about the library and their potential future needs. Did everybody get a chance to read that email? So the committee that is discussing the future needs for the public library, they've also been in a long process of trying to determine how to grow the library, would like to potentially talk to us or talk to a subcommittee about whether the Downs may be a viable option for them to pursue. I think it makes sense for us to welcome that conversation. So I wonder whether that is something that the grandstand committee should start with, or whether we should approach that as a whole group. Opening up the floor, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'd love to hear what people think about how we should engage the library. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, I'll just offer, back to the 10,000 feet from an amenity. I think at a prior meeting, someone mentioned a post office, those sorts of things that have a draw of different demographics, different times of the day and day of the week and time of the year. So, I mean, that can be the first level conversation, maybe at the full committee level, whether that's the sort of amenity that we think would really draw interest and vibrancy to this area. how it actually, if it's new construction, how it relates to everything else, or can it be accommodated within the grandstand? That's certainly next level consideration. And I'm not sure if we're in a position to be able to answer that next level, but keep in mind the 10,000 feet. Is that the sort of thing that we think would be helpful to create a vibrant place?
Right.
I'll use my question now, Trev. Yeah, Tom, I can appreciate that. I can almost think about, the next conversation being, the library going to the developer and wanting to see what spaces they have available in the development. One of them might be this old rickety grandstand. One might be a fancy new brick building. It makes me think though, and I know this is, the third rail conversation, but if I suppose if a library were to be a use that we find valuable, my presumption, and I'll ask Tom to check me on this, but is that it would be a non-tax-paying use. And if that's the case, as we're doing our wishing and recommending and whatnot, I wonder if we ought to be thinking about either a land mass budget or some sort of budget of sorts of how much space we have to allocate with these non-tax-paying uses. I don't think we want to be insisting on 400 acres of post offices and libraries and town centers, right?
Rocky, I just saw you go off mute.
I did. Frankly, I don't think the money aspect or what's it going to cost or how are you going to afford to do it should be part of this committee's consideration. I feel like, if this committee supports a library being in the downtown and the general public does, then we'll figure that out. And that'll be up to us and the town council, and we'll figure it out. I think if you allow that to weight your decisions, we're not going to get to where we want to get.
So it seems like the question we want to answer is Tom's, which is, what does it mean to bring the library to the downtown? And how do we go about beginning to get that, to gain that answer? If you read the email, their request was to have a conversation with us in some form. Kim Bridgham? You're on mute, Kim.
This is a scope question too. So Rocky has answered the question, or you basically said, don't worry about the finances yet. My question is, if we recommend things for the Downs that are moving from someplace else in Scarborough, is it this committee's responsibility to think about the impact of not having I'll use the library as an example, not having the library at that location? So maybe that's a question for you, Tom. So
the impact of no kill.
Yeah, there again, we're not moving it to the other side of town, so I think again, I wouldn't let that limit you. I think that's the worry of the town council and how that space might be repurposed, all those sorts of things.
yeah, my thought is more around the library is currently within walking distance of all those schools.
Yeah.
And those students use that library. So if we move it, if we recommend it's being removed, it moved to the Downs, it's not going to be within walking distance for those students anymore. So is it our job to consider those things?
Yeah, fair enough.
My question.
Yeah, I potentially, but I don't think you need to burden yourself with all those details either.
Okay.
I can envision repurposing that building to serve the needs of many of those students that are going there now. They're not there for scholastic reasons necessarily. They're there for, a safe place to be until they can get a ride home, frankly, in many respects. I don't mean to diminish the importance of it at all.
John Clucci.
Yeah, I just said, I think the committee should be looking towards making sure that this town center is walking distance from the municipal campus. And I think that's in scope or on a couple of people's plates already. So I wouldn't let that, it's the same geographic area. I know it doesn't feel like it because right now you have to go around, but it's literally, you could almost throw a stone there from the middle school today. So I think that's something, a hurdle that we can overcome. It's more about, you're looking for the right mix of amenities that could help bring some vibrancy to that town center. And is a library one of them or not? Or could the future vision of a library be one of them or not?
And we do have a subcommittee that's focused entirely on that enmeshing of Oak Hill and the Downs and the region. So talking about public transportation and some of the other things that I know that committee has broached, this may end up working with that committee more regularly. I guess where we're going to begin with is we want to invite that group to come and talk to us about where they're at, what their vision is, and we can maybe ask them some questions about, use and traffic patterns and so on and so forth. Do we want to ask them to present us with a letter answering those questions? How do we want to answer this invitation from the library committee to talk about their needs and their interests?
Well, you could have the full committee deal with it, but it does strike me, and they're fairly far along in their process. Now, they've been thinking all along for a renovation or addition, I should say. So, but I think having order of magnitude would be helpful to, what size footprint building are they looking at? Those sorts of things, fundamentally, I think would be important to know. Rocky and Dan, can you confirm, have they actually approached you and have you had a chance to have at least an initial conversation?
I can confirm I have had a conversation. It was informal. They have gone down the road of an addition, but they're, at this point, they know they're not coming before they're not going to be on the ballot this year. So they're really starting to rethink and relook at, this downtown idea has kind of just popped up, and, it may have merit or it may not. I think it's some conversation needs to be had with them.
Would the downtown district committee be willing to entertain this as an initial conversation and then report out? And it may be that the full committee wants to take it on to know more.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Tom. I would ask, Tom and Basha and Kim. Yeah. Kim Rand, I saw your hand go up and then down. Do you have a question, or there it is again?
Well, I think it would be beneficial to listen to what they have to say, because I think the recommendation from us comes that, do we think it's a good idea to be in the Downs, or do we not think it's a good idea to be? That's how I see it. That's how I see our decision. So if we can understand what they're looking for, we can say it's either a good thing or a bad thing. And that's just my opinion. And then the other question is I'd like to be on the downtown committee if I could.
I think we can add a member to the downtown committee unless there are any opposed.
I actually indirectly added Kim Rand already to the group anyway, so you are more than welcome. I think whatever the discussion that we are having about the library, probably we will be playing the supporting role of the design committee that is doing. Maybe these two will be going hand in hand to support what type of things that the design committee is thinking, and then what are the inputs that we are going to provide to them. So probably these two will go together at some point of time.
Dan Bacon.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. I was just going to kind of echo Kim's thoughts. I mean, I think Tom did a nice job a few meetings ago outlining the municipal facilities plan. Like, you kind of outlined all of the town's needs over the next 10, 15 years, et cetera. And it seems like there's some things on that list that the committee might find compatible with downtown and not compatible. And maybe that's really the test is, other people will decide ultimately if the library goes there, but this committee could, all right, is it compatible? How does it fit? And that could end up kind of dictating whether it makes sense and that avenue is pursued. When Sarah was describing a consolidated school that needs 10 acres and our downtown's 20, I think that's another question. Like, what's the compatibility of that with downtown? It could be in the Downs. It may or may not be compatible with the downtown, so that's just a lens to look through. You guys aren't deciding, yes, the library has to be in the Downs, but you could say if there's an opportunity, yeah, it could make a lot of sense. It could be beneficial for everyone, but other decisions need to be made before obviously that happens. Just my thoughts on it.
So I think it makes a lot of sense then for the Downtown District Committee to, if it sounds like you're willing to really dive in with the library folks and get answers to a lot of those questions. And I think Kim Bridgham's question is valid right off the top, which is, what's the student use? How would you envision the student use changing, and spend some time with them. And then that group can report back to us at our next meeting or the following one, whenever you get a chance, and let us know what you've learned. So if it makes sense, then what I'll do is I'll respond to them and I'll loop in just the members of the Downtown District Committee, including Kim Rand. And I'll leave it to you all to figure out a time to talk to the library.
Great.
Okay. Other committee discussion points? Anything else anybody wants to bring up? Brian.
It's a curiosity, and I don't know if it's within scope for us, but it strikes me that with certain types of either mixed use development or high intensity downtown development, that there are people that have done it before and have either done it really poorly or done it really well, and I wonder, has there been any thought about partnerships with others who have a track record of similar type of large scale kind of monumental development like this? And I don't know that it's a conversation for right now, but I wonder if there's an openness to that, and whether it merits an agenda item.
What do we think? Does that sound like it belongs with the Modeling and Education Committee?
I think that's right, Travis. I think that's probably something for the model committee to undertake and then present on.
Great. Anybody else?
And I mean, as a threshold issue, if it's totally off the table, we can not even have it at the committee level. But I just wonder if that's a helpful conversation for the developers to be part of.
And Brian, are you referring to potentially other developers that have undertaken a similar task like this? Is that?
Well, I'm thinking if I don't know, if I own 500 acres of land, I'm thinking, and I knew nothing about developing McDonald's or CVS's, would I maybe sell a couple parcels to a CVS developer and have them develop a CVS? Just kind of the distinction between self-development and either partnership or something else.
I think it's a good thing Dan is on the modeling committee. But that feels like a good conversation to take to that group.
All right.
Anything else before we get into next meeting agenda? I'm not seeing any hands, some head shakes. All right, well, so what I have so far is a follow-up on the item that we shelved from this meeting, which is benchmarking and scheduling. I know that Bruce and Tom want to talk before we get into that, so we'll definitely have that on our next agenda. I think the developers report and the subcommittee reports are standard, so we'll expect those things. Was there another item that we had, I feel like I'm missing another item that we had said we would follow up on at the next meeting.
I had mentioned just the notion of whether we need to engage any kind of consultants to assist.
Mhm,
And
right.
maybe it's premature to have that discussion, but selection process and getting on their schedule. I'm just trying to think ahead.
That feels like a natural outgrowth from a scheduling and benchmarking conversation. So it makes
Perhaps.
sense, I think, to put those two
Yeah,
together.
so I think you're right. It's probably premature for next, but I don't want to wait too long to have that conversation.
Kim Rand?
I think, Tom, what you were thinking about, or somebody, is that Rocky and Dan were going to have a takeaway on how much they would, or would they be involved in any of that stuff, like visuals or anything like that. I think that's what we talked about.
Yeah, I'm not sure if if those are essential in terms of tangible deliverables, so to speak. At the end of the day, the developer needs to make application to planning board, so they'll be doing that. I just know from past experience, having some visuals to help relay our vision might be really helpful.
Yeah, I think by the end of our benchmarking conversation, we'll probably have a sense of, anything else?
I remember.
Go ahead,
I
Kim.
remember one of the things was like financials. So if let's say the grandstand committee wants to explore different uses of the grandstand and what it would cost to do that, is that fall within something this committee would budget for, or?
Yeah, stated very clearly under deliverables is financial forecasting. There's all sorts of caveats, within the limitations of the committee and consulting resources that may be available to it. The committee is tasked with estimating the likely cost of desired amenities. So that, those takeoffs are really once you identify those building blocks, those pieces. I just think that the council's interested because it's going to help guide their discussion with the developers around who's going to pay for it.
Okay.
Yeah, and that information is going to be maybe more useful than the graphic designer we hired to draw our dream map. So I do think that it will be important to maybe think in advance that we may need some help coming up with the cost of some of the things that we decide we really want. Other agenda items.
Did we say I don't know where we landed with SEDCO. Did we want, at one point we talked about having them come speak. I don't know if that's still important or not.
I think, Karen Martin, the executive director, is a wealth of information. She's really a data wonk, if you will. It might be helpful for the committee to just appreciate the kind of depth and breadth of her abilities. I'm not sure where those plug in necessarily. What do you think, Travis?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are a little light for our next meeting right now. And I do think the question that's come up a couple of times in this meeting, which is just sort of a 30,000 foot view of where's the market going and what do we think the need may be in the area. So, having Karen give us 10 minutes on that may be valuable because if at the end of the day, this committee's decision is we want 2 public parks or 3, knowing where the market's going might not really matter. But if it's how much outdoor seating do we want, how much covered space do we want, and so on, I think Karen's input very early on might be useful. If she's going to say, don't build retail, then all of the things going on in our mind about what we would build retail around, we can not waste our time on. So I mean, it's a long way of saying I do think a sort of broad market picture might be useful to us early on.
So that's 2 items, and that would be under discussion points, Travis?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Okay. And I really I predict going forward, your subcommittee reports are going to take more and more of your time just because they are going to start churning some information. So I don't think you should feel bad about or searching or manufacturing discussion points necessarily, because I think it's going to start to be fairly natural and organic.
Are there any, I don't see any, are there any members of the public who would like to supply comment tonight?
There are no attendees.
Okay. In that case, it's 8:02. I would welcome a motion for adjournment. Someone from Art, is there a second?
Okay.
Bruce? We are adjourned. See everyone in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Travis.
everyone.
Good night.
Take care.